We are now at the knockout stage of the Freestyle Chess GOAT Challenge in Weissenhaus, Germany, and Magnus Carlsen lost his first game against Alireza Firouzja, which means he is in a must-win situation in game 2, otherwise he will be out of the tournament. It's a really exciting game with a lot of interesting things we can learn from these two great players. So let's dive straight into the action. Magnus playing with white in the following position once again. With a draw of lots, we see that the starting position is with two bishops next to each other in the corner. In one of the other rounds, it was the bishops in the other corner, but now they are on h1 and g1. And when I look at the position, I think I would start here with the move g3 to open up the diagonal for the bishop. And then next move, I want to play f4 so that the other bishop will also look great. However, Magnus didn't play it. He had a different idea as he played the move 1e4, like a normal game of chess, e5. And now he played the move g3. Maybe a strange looking setup, white to place the pawn on e4 when your bishop is on h1. But okay, white is still trying to get a nice grip on the center, on the light squares, with the knight coming to e3 and the bishop on h1 guarding the d5 square. Let's see what happens. Black played here the move c6, and so white also plays the move c3, so that both queens, they are looking in the direction of the center. And black now thinks, okay, I will play the move g6, so we are following a symmetrical structure. White first gets the knight to e3, and so does black the same, knight e6. The other knight comes to e2, and black also played here the move knight e7. Bizarre situation on move 5, with the e-file being totally occupied by both sides' pieces. Very original kind of concept, but for now the pawn breaks have been neutralized. Look, the pawn on e4 covers the f5 and the d5 square, and so does black also cover both the d4 and the f4 square. Very interesting opening play. White, understandably, played here the move rook to f1 with the plan of getting in the move f4 very soon. With pawn on g3, knight on e2 and a rook on f1, that square is sufficiently covered now. Black doing the same, still symmetrical position, and here white goes for the move f4, and what does black? He played the move f5 here as well. Now f takes e5 was played first, critical moment of the game, as there are a number of interesting captures here. Don't take with the queen. I don't think that's a good idea, because then white gets in the move d4 with tempo, hitting the queen on e5. That's not a great idea. While taking with the bishop also doesn't look great, because now white can simply take on f5, and here the knight, rook and the queen, they are covering that square, which means that white is going to win the pawn. So Firouzja, and keep in mind that the draw is enough for him to move on to the next round. He is aiming for symmetrical structure, play the move f takes e4, but finally on move 9, white is able to break the symmetry first by taking with the rook on f8. Now black recaptures with the knight, white captures with the queen on e4, and queen takes e5 played. Still symmetrical position, almost. White's knight on e3 is somewhat better placed than the knight on f8, but still everything to play for. And well, a lot of interesting possibilities. Magnus played here the move queen b4, hitting the pawn on b7, and how to deal with that pawn hanging now. Well, Firouzja decides to defend it by moving the pawn to b6, but very interesting idea instead also is just to play aggressively, more energetically with the move a5, counter-attacking the queen with the point that, well, a check on b6 can always be met by queen c7. Black is okay. While in case you just take the pawn on b7, it's rook b8, attacking the queen. After the queen goes away, you can take with the rook on b2, and this is an incredibly sharp position. Anything can happen there. Well, anyway, Firouzja didn't play it. He played the move b6. Soft move, and this gives white the opportunity to seize the initiative in the center by placing that pawn on d4, controlling the middle of the board, hitting the queen. And where should black go with the queen? Well, there are not that many great squares available. Every square has a drawback. For instance, if you play queen f6, very understandable move, but now finally white is going to castle queenside, and with rook f1 coming next, this queen doesn't feel comfortable on the open f-file. So instead of queen f6, Firouzja play the move queen a5. But this looks not nice at all because, okay, he wants to exchange queens so that the king will be safer, but it's a huge concession, as after queen takes a5, b takes a5, you have very ugly pawns, double pawns on the a file. And with the next move, Magnus wants to open up the position. With the move d4, d5, he's looking for opportunities to activate that light squared bishop. Black captured the pawn on d5, but now castling queenside played, and this is a great move because the king is safe and the rook also does exert pressure against that pawn on d5. Now after black played the move rook c8, white regains the pawn by taking on d5. Fantastic piece coordination, the bishops are doing a great job. Bishop on h1 supports the knight on d5, while the bishop on g1 is eyeing the pawn on a7. These pawns are very weak, as well as the pawn on d7. So too many pawn islands. It looks like a normal game of chess again. And I think, objectively speaking, white is almost winning here because of all these pawn weaknesses. Let's see how it goes in practice. Knight c6 played. So the knight protects the pawn, and white decides to centralize its bishop. Bishop e3 with the idea probably of going to g5 with check very soon. Therefore knight e6 played. Black is covering the g5 square, but now that knight on d5 is so strong. It's taking away so many squares from the black pieces, and white continues slowly improving its position before doing anything else. And that's possible because of these long-term weaknesses black is having in its own position. So bishop g2, nice idea. King e8 getting out of the d file, but now also a nice subtle move by Magnus. He played the move a3, and you may think, why does he play it? Well, you don't want to reckon with maybe knight b4 ideas, making use of the pin on the c file, and also black doesn't have any longer the possibility of playing a4, a3, trying to damage that pawn formation on the queen side. Black goes for bishop f7, and now white activates the knight. Knight from e2 to f4. Great idea, putting pressure on black's position. And here Firouzja thinks, I want to get rid of your annoying knight. And he's setting a little trap here, which is very interesting motive, which I cannot recall having seen in an earlier classical normal game of chess. After knight takes e6, you would think that black recaptures and then the pawn on g5 can be taken. But the trick Firouzja was playing for is that now after d takes e6, that knight, the beautiful knight on d5, is just trapped in the middle of the board. Very original idea. There's no way for the knight out. Actually, there is still one move here. If white would have gone for this line, you can still play bishop h3, pinning the pawn on e6, and white is still doing okay, but no need to take on e6 yourself. And the move played by Magnus is brilliant. It's very nice. He just goes back with a knight to h3, attacking the pawn on g5. Now black defends it with the move h6, and the knight on h3 looks quite stupid. But look at this, the knight finds its way back into the game. It comes to f2 with the plan of coming to e4 and then jumping into the d6 square with a huge knight for white is about to win material. Black play the move d6. Anyway, knight e4. Now you're attacking the pawn. How should black deal with this threat? Well, for instance, if you protect it with your king, well, that runs into a brilliant tactical idea. King d7 was not played, but let me show you the following line. Knight takes d6, eliminating that annoying pawn hitting the rook. If you take the knight, it's knight b6 with a discovered check. You're attacking the rook. After the king goes away, you first capture the rook. King takes back, and bishop takes c6, and white is having a winning endgame. So you cannot play king d7. That leads to problems along the d file. Bishop e5 was played instead, but now the knight from e4 goes to f6 with check, and the knights are starting to take away very important squares from the black pieces. For instance, if you do take with a bishop, well, knight takes f6 is gonna be played, and after the king goes away, you can just play knight e4 with huge problems regarding that pawn on d6. And even if the rook protects it, then the rook is no longer defending the knight, and there are discovered attacks against the knight on c6. Things are looking awful here for black. Firouzja played the move king f8, allowing the move knight to d7 with check, king g7, knight takes e5, getting rid of black's strongest piece on the board. Black is unable to take back with the knight as that, well, first of all, it hangs the pawn on a7. White can just capture it with the bishop, but even stronger here is to give a check with the knight on e7. Well, not a check, you're first hitting the rook on c8, but the idea is to give a check on f5, hitting the king, attacking the weak pawn on d6. First you want to win the pawn on d6, after which the pawn on a7 still remains a weakness. So white is completely winning here. Anyway, Firouzja decided to take back with the pawn, but now, okay, he has a passed pawn, but the pawn is not getting anywhere. White's bishops are monsters in an open position. They are dominating the center, targeting the weak pawns, and now another very nice classy move by Magnus, as a lot of people would think, well, that a pawn, that's a weakness. You don't want to do anything with it. Try to pick it up later on. But Magnus voluntarily played here the move b4. This is very instructive, because now after a takes b4, you may think that there is one weakness less for black. But the problem is that it will now be easier for white to target the pawn on a7, as the rook is looking for an opportunity to come over to the a file and hit the pawn on a7. Black, especially his knights, they are not looking great. They cannot move forward. And in general, I'm struggling to suggest a good move here. g4 was played, but I'm struggling to understand the idea behind it. King b2 is a very good move. As I said, the rook would like to come over to the a file. Also, the king later on can support these two fantastic pawns. Rook b8 was played. As you can see, black is intending to play the move a5 and get rid of that pawn weakness, making use of the pin along the b file. But now another very nice move by white, knight c7. It's not a knight sacrifice, because after knight takes c7 you do take the knight on c6, but that knight is gone, and after that the pawn on a7 is under threat. Knight b5 was played, but the rook comes in to d7, hitting the pawn on a7 one more time. You cannot really save the pawn with the move a6. It runs into bishop d5, putting pressure on the pinned bishop, and if you protect it well, the bishop will come to c5, and here you see the strength of these bishops, and black cannot avoid the loss of material. Therefore, instead of trying to save the pawn, Firouzja had to move its king away from the 7th rank, but now the pawn on a7 can be taken. Knight takes, rook takes, and here you see the connected passed pawns. They are simply too strong. Black is looking for counterplay. Played here the move bishop g6, hoping to mobilize that e-pawn, but with the move rook a6, it's clear that white also is trying to set up a discover check against the king and bishop along the 6th rank. King g5 played, now rook to a8. If rooks will come off the board, it will be easier for white to march forward with its pawn. Rook b6 played, attacking the bishop, but the pawn will go to b5 to protect the bishop. Bishop d3, so here bishop takes, b5 is the main idea, but after rook a5 the pawn is defended. Black runs with the pawn, white comes with the king, and after e3 white just played the move c4, taking away the pressure against the pawn on b5. The e-pawn is not dangerous at all, because if you advance it, it's just rook a1. The rook is back in time, very nicely calculated by Magnus. The point is that after something like king f5, what else to play? White will follow up with rook to e1, and there's no way for the king to come over to support that passed e-pawn. On the next move, white will play the move king c3, hit the bishop. After the bishop goes away, the pawn on e2 will be taken as well. So e2 doesn't work. Instead, Firouzja played the move king f5, but now the rook even has time to go to a better place behind the passed pawn, as if white were to make another move here, he would go rook e8 to attack the pawn from behind. Firouzja resigned at this point. There is absolutely nothing he can do here. After something like bishop e4, for instance, the key motive is to play here the move rook to f8, and after the king goes to e5. It's just rook e8 and you pick up the bishop. So that is just a game over and a very nice idea. I could show you one other line, in fact, after rook f8. For instance, if you go king g5, you can simply take the bishop with the point that the e-pawn is now almost promoting, but it can also be met by rook f5. This is the simplest move. It is a check. The king gotta go back. And now with the move rook to f2, you're giving a check, which means there's no time to promote a pawn on the next move. White will eliminate that e-pawn, white's the bishop up and will win the game. Very smooth victory by Magnus Carlsen, and with this victory he managed to tie the match, and eventually in the tie breaks he showed his class by defeating Firouzja 2 more times. So Magnus is moving on to the semi-finals, but it was not easy at all. And well, in the semi-finals he is playing against the winner of the rapid format, Nodirbek Abdusattorov, and Magnus praised him for his fantastic play so far in the tournament, calling him the most convincing player of the event. Well, let's see if Magnus is in time to find its shape back and Carlsen upset by eliminating Nodirbek Abdusattorov. But well, we will see that in another video probably. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure to subscribe. Thanks for doing that, and soon more coverage from this exciting event.